Welcome to this conversation about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder with expert Nate Sheets. This event is co-sponsored by Parents Helping Parents and the Inclusion Collaborative, a department within the Santa Clara County Office of Education, headquartered here in San Jose, California. The Inclusion Collaborative promotes equity, inclusion, and belonging, valuing every student by strengthening, sustaining, and ensuring inclusive practices. The Inclusion Collaborative provides training, coaching, and technical support for families and educators via their website and more personally via their warm line that takes calls and emails. Help is offered in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and other languages when needed. It's exciting to be offering this program on FASD as part of their charter to train and coach families and educators and other professionals who work with individuals who have special needs of all kinds. Many of you already know about Nate Sheets' work and may have seen his YouTube videos about FASD. But for those of you who don't know about him, I'm going to give you a little information. Nate is a behavior consultant and trainer who's based in Oregon. He specializes in FASD. Nate strives to bring practical and understandable information to families. As we probably all know, FASD is a unique disability that differs from all others and can present emotionally difficult challenges for families. Many parents are frustrated with professional resources and experts who provide little in the way of practical, affordable solutions. Nate's goal is to change that. Nate's going to spend about 75 minutes delivering a presentation that includes the most frequently asked questions submitted during your registration. There will be time at the end for additional questions submitted in the Q&A box. So plan to stick around for this full 90 minutes so that you don't miss anything that Nate has to share. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Nate Sheets.
Hello, everybody. I am excited to be presenting for you all tonight and to talk to you about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. I received a lot of questions and they are extensive. Generally speaking, my workshops are 1 to 2 days. So we will be going through a lot of information and I will try to cover as many of the questions as I possibly can. But you'll probably going to need to either reference the slides afterwards or check out more of my work and come to a workshop sometime. So with that being said, let's get started. My name is Nate Sheets. As was already mentioned, I'm based in Eugene, Oregon, and I'm a behavior consultant, and I specialize in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. My experience really started when I was 7 years old, and I was introduced to the world of foster care. And my parents started to foster children, and they did so for over 20 years. And they did multiple types of foster care. But we had about 40 children come through placement in our home throughout my childhood and teenage years. And through those years, before I even started doing this as a career, I had some experience with the systems, which many of the parents who are attending today will know what I mean. And in foster care in particular, we definitely experienced how dysfunctional child welfare can be, how traumatizing the system that's supposed to help children actually is for many different reasons. My parents experienced what many of you experience from professionals, being dismissed, whether it be the teachers at school, mental health professionals, or healthcare professionals. They weren't believed about how they were parenting, and they weren't believed about the behaviors that were seen at home, because a lot of the kids didn't show any of the behaviors in those other settings. And so that was difficult. My parents were also part of the very first therapeutic foster parents in the state of Oregon. And that is a higher level of foster care where the foster providers are trained. They're given more training, and you're expecting a lot of the kids that we're going to expect to be tough. And by being tough, we often mean challenging behaviors. And so I experienced all this, of course, without my knowledge of disability or the brain or trauma. And, with the typical narcissism of a teenager. And of course, I had no intention of going into any of this field. I wanted to be a tour guide in Europe somewhere, but that didn't work out. But at this point, I've had 12 years of experience in developmental disabilities, in particular, all pretty much with foster care. And my first 6 years of my experience was actually at a private foster care agency that provided therapeutic foster care for kids with challenging behaviors. So my first introduction to the field was through this idea of challenging behaviors and helping kids. And for the last 6 years, I've had my own business called Oregon Behavior Consultation, and I'm an independent behavior consultant. Now, I start with my experience because I want to then go into my education, which is I have a bachelor's degree in business administration. And I mention that now because, as you will very quickly pick up on, my approach is very much focused on the brain and understanding how people's brains work. And so because I have not been formally trained, but I'm self-taught at this point, it's very important for me to be accurate. And I consider what I'm telling you the most modern information in terms of neuroscience as well as trauma and the stressors that we'll talk about. And so if there's any corrections, if something doesn't seem right, I'm always open to suggestions. And I hope to move and get my doctorate soon. So we'll see if that works out. Like I mentioned before, a big part of understanding how a person with an FASD is going to be successful, whether or not they're in foster care, will be in understanding how the systems interact with them, and unfortunately, how the systems stress them the heck out, as well as their family. And systems can include the adults that are a part of that, the professionals, processes in the system, how we go about doing things, and how we go about treating quote unquote challenging behaviors, the stated ideals and goals of the systems, and the policies and laws that govern the systems. And I'm sure most of you in here are absolutely aware that systems are not informed about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, nor are they equipped to support our kids with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders or our teenagers or adults with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. They're also not equipped to address invisible disabilities. They often do not even recognize invisible disabilities, leaving parents to constantly remind the people that there is a disability going on here. Systems are not good at working with people who have inconsistent skills, who can do something on one day and not do something on another. It seems like it's shocking, but really that is exactly what we would expect when we think about how FASD impacts the brain, executive functioning in particular. Sensory dysregulation. There's some knowledge of sensory supports, but really their power is not used. We are not using sensory supports to our full advantage, especially for kids who've been through early childhood trauma. And then we have the trauma element. While trauma-informed care is absolutely becoming more of a thing, there is not a lot of success in working with people who've been through trauma, but then who also have the developmental disability that comes with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And of course, the systems are not equipped or informed to understand challenging behaviors, much less address them effectively, and much less prevent them in the future. And we'll talk about why that is. Why is it hard for families to support a person with a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder? There's two major areas that I've seen through my career. One is the emotional toll it takes on you all, especially when your child knows the information. We talk to them about it. They're giving us the right answers. They know they shouldn't hit their sister. They know they shouldn't run away or whatever. But then in the moment, that doesn't do anything. And so the behavior doesn't change. That's discouraging as a parent. Oftentimes, if we're talking about dysregulation and escalation, they'll personally attack you. They might say some really, really mean things. But as I will talk to you about, this is usually in a state of feeling unsafe, and it's exactly what we would expect. But even then, knowing the information, hearing somebody call you a name or saying they don't love you or that you're not the real parent or whatever it is they might say to you, that's still hard to handle on that emotional level. Oftentimes, the behaviors that we see will seem manipulative and intentional. And I'm going to tell you multiple times, these behaviors are almost certainly not intentional. Your child does not want to be unsuccessful. They want to be successful, but they do not have the skills that being successful actually requires. You can't just be successful. You have to have those skills. And it's easy for us as those who are caring for them to forget how hard every day, every hour, right? all of the stressors that they're encountering being put in situations unintentionally by the adults that are ultimately unreasonable for them. And so we put them in systems, we take them to therapist after therapist, and it's frequently unhelpful at best and detrimental at worst. Then there's also the practical side of things. Practically, how can we support this kind of disability, especially when there's virtually no system support, when it's almost all on the family? Some people will need constant supervision just to be successful. Other people will need inconsistent supervision to be successful. And it's that inconsistency that's especially difficult. Oftentimes, people with fetal alcohol, especially teenagers and adults, they're desperate to appear normal. And so when we try to support them, there might be opposition or there might be resistance because of that. And that's something we're going to have to problem solve. And it's also difficult, as we've said before, to mention or to support their needs in any of the systems that we put them in, of course, including school and therapy. Maybe you have staffing services down there. We do have that in Oregon, and finding appropriate caregivers can be difficult. And so we want to remember, as parents or as foster providers or as adults who love a kiddo with an FASD, that however hard it is for us to handle that stress, I guarantee you the stress on them, if not right now, is worse. It will eventually be worse as they get older, unless we understand how their brain works and are willing to take the shift of change in thinking that I'm going to encourage you to do and to advocate for their supports. And sometimes that means pushing up against the systems. And so that's part of the journey. A lot of my first exposure to understanding challenging behaviors occurred right when I started my career, literally in the first days. And I'm very thankful for that. And that was being exposed to the book, The Explosive Child by Dr. Ross Greene. And he developed what we call collaborative and proactive solutions, or CPS. And maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you've tried the book and it didn't quite work out for you. We'll talk about that. But a very powerful statement to me was this idea that your explanation for the behavior you're seeing guides your intervention. And what we mean by that, if I interpret in the moment a behavior happening as being intentional, that will naturally dispose me as the adult to punish, right? And to lecture or to reward and try to bribe the behaviors out. We might ask ineffective abstract questions like, why did you hit your sister? Because the kid's not going to say, well, I struggle with emotional dysregulation and polyvagal theory suggests that I'm not in a good space right now. And so I'm going to need some support from you. They don't say it that way. Suspensions from school placements or other displacements from foster home to foster home. And of course, for many people, this ultimately leads an arrest when the justice system concludes that behaviors are intentional. But if we take the skill approach that I'm suggesting that we take, which is to assume that there's a skill deficit contributing to or causing this issue, and I'll continue to explain that will naturally dispose us to go in a different direction, right? Because you can't punish skills and manifest them into existence or develop them. It's literally the opposite. And so when we remember and implement into our lives and in our responses to kids that this is an issue of skill, it allows us to be proactive, because if they're struggling with their attention span or their impulse control or their memory right now, they're probably going to struggle with it the next day or the next week. And so we can try to be proactive. It allows us to think of accommodations that will actually help. And it allows us generally to think differently and empathize with our kiddos. We can imagine, what would my life be like without a very good attention span. And then by doing that exercise, it helps us to come up with practical suggestions, which is how most of the suggestions that I suggest get manifested, is through these simulating not having these skills. When we reframe behaviors in this way, it makes things easier on us emotionally. And you need all that you can get. Trust me, I know, right? A lot of things are stressful right now. And so anything that will help make that emotional load easier will be beneficial. Again, it allows us to also practically problem solve. I don't know what to do for a kid who's a little jerk, right? Or who's a brat, or who does not want to be successful. I don't believe those children exist, but I do have suggestions for kids who struggle with impulse control, who struggle with emotional dysregulation. And ultimately, eventually, we want to help the person as they learn about their brain and their body understand what's going on. And so that's the benefit of taking these approaches. I'm also going to argue that when we take the skills-based approach, it will actually be more accurate in interpreting behaviors than our gut feelings based upon our observation and our biases as parents with traditional methods, who were brought up in a certain way, who maybe were taught certain old school thoughts about behaviors. I'm going to argue that this is more accurate. And we start to find that out when we provide supports for these skills. So what is a traditional understanding of behavior? Well, one idea is that we learn behaviors, or children learn behaviors that are acceptable when good behaviors are reinforced and when bad behaviors are punished. When somebody, a kid or a teenager, doesn't or want to follow our directions or refuses to do something, we say things like, well, they just want to be in control, without really understanding the neurological reasons for that. Or they just want to get something that they want, but it's a lot deeper than that. I promise you, it's way deeper than just the kid choosing to want something and then having a blow up over it, even though it can look that way on the surface. When a child or teen has bad behaviors, the traditional view blames it on the kid's character, or on their parents' abilities. And I'm pretty sure that a majority of you have had your parenting skills criticized, if not by professionals, maybe by your own family members or extended family. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to view these challenging behaviors, even if it doesn't feel that way to you, to think of it as, this child can't meet my expectations versus they won't meet the expectations. And this is a big part of understanding fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And so when we take this approach, we understand that challenging behaviors come when we are expecting anybody, not just people with FASDs, but anybody, to use cognitive skills that they cannot use or access. And so with that interpretation, we can assume that yes, our child or teenager, despite their anger, despite their issues, they do want to be successful, but they're going to have struggles doing so in a society that doesn't understand them. And they don't even understand themselves. They can't tell you the solution. They can't give you the supports. It's something we have to discover. And so skills then are learned when we adjust expectations and support them appropriately, and then slowly build up, versus what typically happens. We hold an expectation, they keep missing it, and we keep punishing them for missing it, even though it's out of their direct control. In terms of the specific cognitive skills that we are going to expect people with FASDs to struggle with, there's a few of them, and I'll try to hit on as many tonight as I can, though I'm also going to try to address some behaviors, but we're going to almost certainly expect that they are going to struggle with processing verbal language in the moment. Even if it doesn't look like it, even if they're really good at expressing themselves, this is part of the invisible disability. And when I do an assessment for families, and the family tells me we think that the processing verbal language is pretty good, I have a flag in my brain, and I'm going to ask some follow-up questions, because oftentimes after asking those questions, if not, oh yeah, they probably do struggle, it's at least a possibility, and we can support something that's a possibility and see what it does. Executive functioning is a term that I'll be using a lot, and almost certainly people with FASDs will struggle in one or many or all areas of executive function. And that's going to be expected. That's what often leads to inconsistent skills. And it's also something that if we don't remember how executive functioning works, we will continue to put too high of expectations on them. And processing speed is the other one that I'm almost certainly going to expect will be an issue. They can often do the thinking if they are given the time and will not be distracted. And that time can be hours, it can be days, depending on the concept, but often in our moment-to-moment interactions, which is really what I focus on, we interrupt that thinking process, even trying to be helpful by speaking, by clarifying. Sometimes we actually stop the processing, believe it or not. And so we want to be aware of that. And then Memory issues will often be an issue, and they're pretty variable in terms of one person with an FASD to another. So some might struggle with what we think of as short-term memory, and others will struggle with more of the long-term memory, and some will struggle with all of it. Occasionally, I have somebody who has just great memory all around, and that shows really the adaptive power of the brain. That doesn't mean that they have good executive functioning. It doesn't mean they can process verbal communication. It means that somehow their brain has figured out how to remember pieces of information. There's research by Dr. Christine Petrenko in New York talking about what's called the neurobehavioral model and some specific interventions and reinterpretations of behaviors. And when we buy into this as parents, we are more likely to be proactive instead of reactive and trying to avoid the issue next time or plan for the issue. And that in of itself is great because by nature, we kind of just take things as they come, right? We're doing our thing day after day. But to support somebody with a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, it's going to take advanced parenting. And a big part of that is thinking ahead and being proactive. Parents will also feel more successful in their parenting because they're adjusting expectations with what they know about their child's brain. And then that will lower a lot of the behaviors and allow them some wiggle room to start building these skills. We can see that a lot of the traditional strategies that people use with our kids are not going to work. For example, talking to them about it, having them promise not to do it again, asking them, what can you do the next time, right? And doing that verbally. There can be many potential issues with that on the cognitive skill level. That conversation itself, if it's just verbal, we already know that's a problem because they will almost certainly struggle with processing verbal communication in the moment. It's often too abstract for a lot of kids if we're talking hypothetically. Some do hypotheticals really well, others don't. That's a pretty variable skill in people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Their memory might be distorted, so their understanding of the conversation, if not warped at the very beginning, can become warped or confabulated later on. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And the question is, does the intervention help them in the moment, right? Are they going to, in that moment of escalation where they're about to punch their sister or whatever, are they going to say, wait a minute, I've talked about this and I have another plan and now I'm going to initiate it. And because I'm doing that, that helps me get calm. No, not something like this does not help with in the moment prompts for the brain. And unfortunately, we do this all the time with kids. And then when it doesn't work, we punish them because our interpretation is that they're doing it on purpose, even though that's not what's going on. Oftentimes, maybe we have done this, maybe the school has done this, but somebody will have our kids sign a contract to stop doing certain behaviors or to do something. And ultimately, these are not going to be helpful. It's essentially telling the kid to try harder with no real supports. And oftentimes we're not considering, why is this behavior happening? We just think the kiddo could stop it if they are motivated enough or whatever, and it doesn't work. And of course, when it doesn't work, we can consider that very easily as lack of compliance, and that disposes us to move toward punishing. So we have points and reward systems, sticker charts, all that kind of stuff. And these are also problematic. They do not work with what we know works in teaching our brain's behaviors. And this is really true for all of us. And it's confusing because the kiddo often wants to do well. They are wanting to do well. They're not conning us. They are going to try their best. They want that reward or whatever. And so we assume then when they can't be successful that it's their choice. And oftentimes, unless there's other support somehow built into this, it's not providing that in the moment support. And essentially, long-term incentives do not work pretty much for anybody. It takes a lot of executive function to value your future enough to change your present behavior. And this is true for everybody, but especially for people with executive dysfunction. And again, that lack of success is interpreted as lack of compliance. And so to help people understand how I view behaviors in the simplest way possible, it's by thinking of things as recipes, and situations, I should say, as recipes and interactions. So every situation, every expectation, and every interaction demands cognitive skills. And so you can see these little recipe cards. Our expectation or our situation, something we as adults think is easy, right? Having a friend over. It demands these cognitive skills, and it demands it in different ways, second by second by second. Things can change very quickly. And so for small periods of time, what we think is an easy activity is actually very complicated for a lot of these kids, especially if they have a history of trauma, which is underlying a lot of what we're doing with this lack of safety for their more primitive brain. We'll talk about that a little bit. 5 minutes of homework seems simple. Heck no. It's probably unreasonable for most people with an FASD. So I encourage most of my parents, if homework is making you or your child miserable in the afternoon, we're going to stop doing homework. You all have other things to worry about. And I have what's called the cognitive skills filter, and it helps me to reframe. So people will give me their interpretations, or they'll describe a behavior, but in my brain, I'm translating it through one of many different cognitive skills. So somebody might say, she does it for attention, right? She won't leave me alone. She's sitting down doing something, and a few minutes later, she's coming into the room bothering me. And there can be many, many different interpretations. And so these are just examples, but maybe we can think, well, she can't actually hold her attention long enough to even self-entertain, because to play with toys by yourself demands a certain kind of attention span that not everybody with an FASD has. And yet many do. Some of your kids can definitely self-entertain with the right toy or activity. He won't keep his hands to himself, right? Again, choosing that this is a kiddo who's just, being obnoxious, but really it's probably more of an issue of his body being dysregulated or not having impulse control available to him at that moment or at all. She lies because it causes drama, right? I get that a lot. She likes drama. He likes drama. Well, maybe not. If lying is occurring and we know the person has prenatal alcohol exposure, there's a chance that they are confabulating and remember things in an inaccurate way. We might use a character assassination, like he's being a little asshole. And while that sounds like an accurate statement maybe in the moment, really what's going on with kids who are very angry and teenagers who are very angry and mean is it's likely that they do not have the coping skills to calm themselves. And so we put them in therapy to practice cognitive emotional regulation, but that's not the first step. And we'll talk about that. They just don't want to do their schoolwork. Well, maybe actually what's going on is they don't have executive functioning fuel. We only have a certain amount of executive functioning abilities. And when it's out, it's out. And there's no point in trying to press through it unless you're wanting to have some kind of explosion. The most important thing I can recommend to everybody on this call is to buy the book and read the book Beyond Behaviors. It's going to talk about a lot of my concepts. It is not about FASD, believe it or not, but I still think it is the most important book you can read, especially if your kid has been through early stress or trauma, not necessarily even abuse and neglect. If you took them home a few days after they were born or the day they were born, but they have struggled with sensory dysregulation or medical issues, or just ongoing stress, maybe due to their own behaviors, this book is incredibly important. It is the number one recommendation I have right now. And it will also talk about why even me answering a lot of the questions that I received about specific behaviors is very difficult, because believe it or not, and I'm saying this as a behavior consultant, focusing on the behaviors is not going to be very helpful, and focusing on preventing the behaviors immediately will not be very helpful. We have to take a huge step back and approach things with a very different framework. An important part of this, and this is covered in Dr. Delahook's book, is this idea of neuroception. And our brains this is true of everybody, are constantly assessing our safety. And it's not in our executive functioning, which is our more conscious skills. It's happening in the more primitive, ancient parts of our brain. And so we have no initial control over it, especially as infants, children, teenagers, or even young adults. And so we cannot learn cognitive emotional regulation, which is what a lot of therapy is trying to get them to do, until we address the issues of unsafe neuroception. Let's see. This idea of neuroception and the brain figuring out what is safe and what is not safe, it happens the moment we are born. In the first hours and in the first days of life, our idea of what is safe is being developed. And so if we are born prematurely and under stress, we automatically know that neuroception will be a little bit different. Or if we are in the NICU for a couple of weeks and then we go home to a completely different sensory environment and are dysregulated, we know there's an issue of neuroception. Of course, young infants, toddlers, children who are in abusive or neglectful situations, their brains will have a different idea of what being safe and calm is. And for some of my clients, they have no baseline. They have no concept of what we're even trying to get them to feel, because they have only ever felt an underlying unsafe neuroception, which leads to frequent daily behaviors. And so the way forward with this, and this is not cliche, this is not ideological, this is not feel good, this is my understanding of the neuroscience, is safety cues, which we as the adults establish. And there's many different ways that this happens, but it's going to be slow, especially if a kid has been through significant trauma. And we have to be willing to take it at their brain's pace and then slowly build up more of the advanced cognitive skills that we're hoping to see. Our neuroception, and the context it grows up in will impact our overall brain development. So children who are significantly abused and neglected, for example, they will likely develop intellectual disabilities, where if they had, this is not including fetal alcohol, of course, whereas if they had not had that, they would have a completely different cognitive skill set, right? And be more in pace with their developmental processes. When you add that to fetal alcohol, it's an incredibly complex layer of how we're going to have to approach these kids and work with them. This idea of neuroception is critical to polyvagal theory, and which is a very popular theory. It has not, unfortunately, been studied with an FASD for people with FASDs, but as we'll learn, really no therapies have been really studied with FASDs, and those that have, we've not seen promising results. So that was one of the questions. Should I do ABA and all of that? I'm going to say no, because it has not been shown to be effective with an FASD. And so ultimately, neuroception is what we call our bottom brains. It's the sense of safety to the environment around us, to situations, and to people and interactions. And so when somebody has ongoing unsafe neuroception, you're probably going to see them be very reactive to you. When you're just walking up to them, when you just say, hey, I have a question, if there's an immediate reactivity, that's a good sign that faulty neuroception is a part of this. Faulty neuroception is unsafe. So we have safe neuroception when we're feeling safe. We have unsafe neuroception, so we're not feeling safe. And unsafe neuroception is good if you're actually unsafe. It's what sends us into fight or flight. And so when it becomes faulty is when we feel that unsafe neuroception when there actually is no threat, which is what I guarantee the vast majority of parents today are experiencing. It looks like the issue is about the fact that you told them they couldn't watch TV, but ultimately it is the building up of all of the negative interactions and all of the stressors up to this point. And so how you respond in that moment, if you make it about the behavior and about the TV, you're not necessarily addressing the underlying issues of safety that we're going to need to move forward. Our bottom brain structures will recognize various cues, and there are so many different cues, and they are dual coded with memories and emotion. So certain things in the environment or in the people around us can actually create this physiological response. And that physiological response is, in polyvagal terms, a pathway. And we have two pathways that we can go on if we're not feeling calm. One is the red pathway, and that's what we think of as fight or flight. The other is the blue pathway, which is an immobilization or a complete shutting down or a near complete shutting down of the brain. We'll talk a little bit more about that. When it comes to faulty neuroception, the things that can trigger it are vast in number, especially if a child spent many years under stress. Body sensations, so feeling something in the body and not understanding what it means, can lead to feeling unsafe and potentially challenging behaviors, especially if this lack of safety is occurring while the adults are demanding that you sit there and do something like a worksheet or whatever. Tones of voice, a very big one. If they can sense the slightest irritation or certain qualities of voice in some cases, or certain types of voice like low voices or high voices, that can trigger faulty neuroception depending on the individual history of the kid and what they were exposed to and experienced. Familiar physical environments, certain words and phrases, types of people. And ultimately, in my opinion, we get to the point with these kids where stress of any type or demands of any type set off these flags and the flags of danger. And again, if we're not interpreting it as that, we're going to be disposed to use unhelpful responses. All of this polyvagal trauma stuff at this point is not specific to FASDs. So why is it very, very relevant to the vast majority of you? By nature of having an FASD, you are very likely to either come from a history or be put in situations that breeds this idea that is going to encourage faulty neuroception and lack of safety to occur. I mentioned some of them already. And these are often what we think of as ACEs in the trauma-informed kind of thing. But also, I do want to say, as gently as possible, that disappointing our parents or having our parents constantly frustrated or angry with us creates faulty neuroception. And sensory dysregulation, right? Even if everything is going well, even if we have a great relationship, if we are feeling in our body some kind of sensory dysregulation in an ongoing fashion and it's not addressed, eventually that can be linked to trauma and faulty neuroception. And so it's important before we do anything, right? Before we consider any therapy or even my own model, which is cognitive supports, that we determine, could faulty neuroception be a factor for this person? And ideally, you'll have a mental health professional who can help you figure this out. Somebody who's experienced in polyvagal theory and maybe even experienced in FASDs. And I know they're very hard to come by. But some of the clues we might look for is, have they had sensory dysregulation that was continual, even if they don't now? Maybe things have improved in recent years, but in the past, has that been an ongoing issue? Or is it currently an ongoing issue? Are they frequently oppositional? Are they easily reactive to situations that they shouldn't be reactive toward? Do they escalate multiple times per day? That's a big sign of faulty neuroception. Do they go on the blue pathway and shut down? And I'm not talking, when I say shut down, I'm not talking about like you can kind of see the energy, and they're holding it together and it's slowly going away. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a freeze mode, unable to bring in information, very slow to move or to comply, if they can move or comply at all. And this is part of our ancient structures in the brains immobilizing us, because again, the brain thinks it's in danger from these everyday activities because it doesn't have the executive functioning to make the correction and say, oh no, this is just my parent asking me to do something that really isn't a big deal. We'll work toward that, but it's not there if they've had this history. Do they overreact to small stressors and generally have no coping skills? Do they reject reasoning and comfort in the moment? All of those are signs of faulty neuroception. And so when we think about that and we think about all of the diagnoses that maybe our children have been given, I'm sure you all recognize many of these. The question becomes, can some of this be reinterpreted through the idea of faulty neuroception, things like reactive attachment disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. I'm going to argue that yes, that we're going to think of it less in terms of these mental health disorders and more in terms of their brain not feeling safe. So if we think about this and we conclude that yes, faulty neuroception is probably a factor, we're going to want to find a qualified mental health professional. And I know, again, all of the difficulties that surround that. I do not know any specific people. People are often asking me for neuropsychologists, for diagnoses, or for therapists. I don't have those contacts. I'm the only person I know in terms of my specific approach. I hope to change that someday, but that's where we're at now. There are definitely FASD specialists throughout the country, but I don't necessarily have a network that I can clue people into. So I wish I could be more helpful, but I'm not. We need to figure out where is our child at developmentally, which is one of the major reasons I am pleading with you to get the book Beyond Behaviors by Dr. Mona Delahook, because she's going to walk you through this. There will be worksheets on your child's brain and their sensory system. All of this is critical. And also worksheets on yourself, because this idea of neuroception applies to us. Some of us have PTSD from our kids and their challenging behaviors. And so even just approaching them can create a response in us, which they will see on our face, and that creates immediate unsafe neuroception. So we don't want that negative reactivity pattern to be happening. We're going to determine the specifics about how our child responds when feeling unsafe. We're going to determine their specific triggers to faulty neuroception, being very aware that there are probably going to be dozens, if not hundreds, of potential triggers that we will not know about, because they can be very, very slight things. And then we're going to do our best to be proactive, and then also supporting whatever's going on in the moment, but in a developmentally appropriate way. Telling a kiddo, hey, stop, or in the moment saying, you really should think about the consequences if you keep doing that. That's not going to be developmentally appropriate, because thinking about consequences demands executive functioning, which they sure as heck don't have when they're escalated on the red pathway. We're going to discover soothing sensory supports for ourselves and for our child, and we're going to prioritize safety and connection, and again, in that developmentally appropriate way. This idea that you cannot use your executive functioning if you are feeling unsafe is nothing new. We have known this for a long time. And so Dr. Delahook reminds us this is a very, very common denominator in the field of neuroscience. So this is not just an opinion. So if your kiddo is escalated at school and the teachers are like, well, we keep trying to do all of these things, but it's all happening in the moment and the kid's not listening and they're being disrespectful and things are getting worse. Yeah. That's what we know about the brain. Should not be surprising to anybody, which is why it's important that we, the adults, shift our approach and shift our lens, and that we insist the systems do so as well. So if you're dealing with a kiddo, or if you're working with a kiddo who is the kind that is extreme, they're very reactive, they have multiple escalations per day, they come from that history of stress. People ask me, what's the path forward here? So I've come up with this understanding of the order that we must move in. And so a lot of people are trying step number 5, really, which is cognitive behavior therapy, or just demanding with whatever skills or knowledge we have, cognitive solutions. But that's not where we need to start. We start with connecting with our child every single day. Sometimes maybe it's just 5 minutes. So hopefully, occasionally we can do something longer, with activities that make us both feel soothed in our brains and our bodies, that we know they can be successful with, and that they know they cannot have, when we know that will not create a stress response. So, if you choose to play a board game and we're going to get all riled up about the rules, we don't want to start there. We can move there eventually. Once we've established this for many months, we will eventually start to look into, how do I help my child co-regulate? And this, through the connection, will likely happen naturally in a lot of ways. And the biggest way we help them co-regulate is by being regulated ourselves, and by slowing down, by being warm with our face and our eyes, and not making a big freaking deal about all the behaviors that they have, right? We don't have to address every little thing. And yet often that is our impulsive response, whether it's a correction or a consequence, etc. We also will start to then explore sensory support so we can teach them to use. We can also be, again, using some of these sensory supports in the very first step. We can rub our kids back for a few minutes if that's something that is safe for them, that we have an appropriate relationship with them, et cetera, and that they like, of course, and it soothes them. And then we move into thinking about FASD more fully and what FASD brings to the table in terms of those cognitive struggles and how we can support them. I'm going to skip this because you all have it in the slides. Moving into the more cognitive stuff, this is applicable to everybody, and this is probably one of the most important concepts that you could remember from tonight. And that is this idea of our executive functioning skills, which we'll talk a little bit about. We have only a certain amount of fuel, and we can assume that if you have a disability like an FASD, that you will have less fuel than your peers, and especially less fuel than the adults. And this is an idea that these skills are literally a limited resource. We know this neurologically. And the more complicated the skill or the task is, the more fuel we are going to be using. And we are often unintentionally wasting this executive functioning fuel. And we do this by having unreasonable cognitive expectations, right? We're doing too much verbal. We're expecting them to hold their attention more than they can. Negative interactions drain everybody's executive functioning fuel. When we allow behaviors to turn into a complete power struggle or a disaster or an explosion, that means that they will have literally less ability to use their executive functioning later on in the day. We might have a child who can hold it together for a while. Maybe they don't have behaviors at school, but then they come home and we can tell that we're going to have a rough night, right? Or they don't have any ability to think. And this is a big concept of executive functioning fuel. When we force kids not to actually use the skills they have, but to hold it together, and they start to develop that ability, they're not learning, they're still feeling unsafe, but hey, at least they're not having the challenging behaviors. That is draining on the fuel. We do not want to force kids to, through sheer willpower, which is usually imperfect and ineffective anyway, hold it together, especially for long periods of time, more than a few minutes. We naturally replenish our executive functioning when we sleep. And if you're dealing with a kiddo who struggles with sleeping, who refuses to sleep, who just can't stay asleep, especially if it's been going on long term, we can expect then for their fuel to struggle the next day. And that makes sense because the brain needs to sleep in order to replenish it. We also can get small boosts of executive functioning fuel by eating food with glucose in it. And of course, that can be tricky. I like to eat grapes a lot because they're kind of easy to grab and snack on when I need a little boost. Some children or adults may get a boost or at least psychologically feel like they're boosted when they take a nap. That's not universal. Of course, everything must be individualized. When a person does not have any more fuel, or has very little fuel, or just doesn't have the skills that are in the executive functioning system, or they haven't developed well enough, we're going to see outward signs of this. We're going to see frustration and escalation. If they have sensory issues, it will actually make the sensory issues more difficult and more painful for the brain. And we might see them either overtly or they will be feeling maybe some kind of anxiety. And so how can we preserve the fuel? Well, excuse me for yawning. My fuel's low. We want to adjust expectations when they're struggling. And we, as adults, really, really hate this. We really hate it because it feels like we're giving in. And other adults accuse us of giving in. But it's not giving in. It is adjusting the expectations so that they can regulate, because we're not going to move forward when they're pissed off, right? Or when they're feeling unsafe. It is just not going to happen. Do not waste your time doing this, especially if you have a younger child. Please learn. Do not do this. It is okay for us to adjust expectation to allow the child to get back to a place where we can then soothe them, co-regulate, and connect, and then come up with some kind of solution. And that will get easier the more we can do this and as their brain develops. Evenings we can expect to be hard by the nature of executive function fuel. Whew, sorry, I'm probably going to yawn a few more times. And so we want to, in the evenings, try to keep things consistent, have things be soothing, give them that free time, give them a long transition from school if they need it. Obviously, it's a little bit different now with COVID, probably much more blurry. And try not to engage in power struggles. Just try to have the evenings be a time of relaxation and connection as much as possible. This might mean evening activities that might contribute to behavior shouldn't happen, right? Whether it's homework, whether it's Boy Scouts or whatever, if it's demanding a lot from them and they're not being successful, we might have to pause those expectations. Now, I'm not saying if they love going to Scouts or youth group and they're great at it and it's a time for them to socialize, I'm not saying stop it. If there's no problem, don't fix it. But when we see that this is a struggle, it might be something we pause for a while. Whatever we're doing, we want to ask ourselves, is this support really anything more than expecting them to try harder? So when I bribe my child, that's just a different way, maybe even a nice way of telling them, you better try harder, and that's not going to work. When we use those reward systems, if there's no other supports put in place, we're essentially saying you got to try harder. When we lecture them over and over and over again, we're essentially telling them to try harder. So we want to be asking ourselves that, okay? Now I'm going to start to go into some of the specific questions that people asked. And most of the questions, of course, are asking me, how do I address a behavior? And so I hope that I made it very clear that if you start with where we're about to start and you never address what we talked about in terms of neuroception, you might see some improvements, but really the focus is incorrect. The focus should not be on the behavior, as unintuitive as that sounds. But that being said, I'm going to answer some of your questions. So I want you all to take a look at this picture, which maybe you recognize. I'm also going to open the chat here. And in the chat box, I want you to tell us, do you see, what color is the dress that you see? Don't do it in the Q&A box, do it in the chat box. I'm slightly contradicting Marley. What color of dress do you see? Gold and white, white and gold, gray and light blue, blue and black, brownish gray, gold and white, black and blue, gold and white. So we are seeing two major groups here. Most people see either white and gold, or they see blue and black, or some darker colors. These are very different ideas of what color this dress is, right? And this is an issue of perception. Now, why our brains are being tricked here potentially is not necessarily what's going on with an FASD, but I'm making a point and an illustration, right? Because if you are seeing anything here other than a white and gold dress, you're actually hallucinating. Right? You're hallucinating because your brain is not giving you an accurate picture of the world. There is only one correct answer to this question, and it is that this dress is blue and black. And so if I were, for the many of you, maybe half the people or more who said gold and white, what if I were to approach you as this? Let's see, Susanna Flores, what are you talking about? This is gold and white. Are you lying to me, Susanna? What's going on? Are you just trying to create drama? What's your deal, right? If I interpret the incorrect answer, because white and gold is not the correct answer, as intentional lying, I'm actually not correct. Because is Susanna or any of the other people lying about what they see? No, they are giving us their perception. And actually, we shouldn't trust our perceptions because our brains are very flawed, but we intrinsically trust it. So then to have somebody call us a liar, right, or to push back against that, that's going to piss us off or make us feel unsafe because we trust what we see in front of us. Now I'm going to explain because people want to know what's going on with this picture. But again, a reminder that this is not necessarily what's going on with FASDs. This is a visual perception issue. And this picture just so happened to be taken at just the right angle and just the right lighting to where our brains can make one of many, but essentially one of two interpretations. And when the picture pops up on the screen, your brain doesn't say, whoa, 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 hold on, I got to figure this out. You don't see like a little loading bar as it figures out the correct answer. If that happened, we would all see pretty much the same thing. But when it pops up on the screen, bam, your brain has to make a decision. And for a lot of people, a good number of people in this group, it's giving you the wrong information. And how is this related to FASDs? Well, I've already mentioned it has to do with what we perceive to be lying, and which is a big question people will have for me. Is it possible that a person with an FASD is intentionally, willfully, maliciously lying? Sure, I'm going to grant that. But before I go to that conclusion, especially if it's my gut visceral reaction, there are other things we want to consider. One area is maybe they're not fully understanding, and this can be in different contexts here. When we ask a question and we get an immediate answer, like a yes or no question, or an I don't know, or a denial of a behavior, whatever it might be, if it's immediate and impulsive, there's a good chance they didn't stop and take the time to think about what was being said. Now, this can be an issue of neuroception where they feel unsafe and that creates the impulsivity. But even if that's not a factor, the FASD brain is probably going to struggle with impulsivity. A lot of professionals might suggest, well, stick to yes or no questions. But here actually is the danger of yes or no questions. When somebody senses that a question is yes or no, and we're talking about time after time after time to move the conversation or the expectations along, they might give us something. And so without giving them that time to think, we are actually encouraging them to be impulsive. And an impulsive, incorrect answer is not the same as an intentional lie, at least in my opinion. We also might forget that they could be giving us incorrect information because of their difficulties in processing verbal communication, right? Or their executive functioning. And so because they're actually not processing all of it, they are giving you their understanding. That is not the same as lying. We can go even a step deeper and think about perception. Now, in this circle, I have the exact same picture of the dress, but I've cut out the information that tricks many people's brains. And so for those of you who are seeing gold and white, for some of you, you're still seeing it, which means you have a stubborn brain and it's not changing. But for some of you, now you're seeing a white and gold dress, right? Or you're seeing something a little bit different and your brain is picking up on those cues and giving you a different picture. But it is the same picture, but I just cropped out the conflicting information. So again, that's an issue of perception. In FASDs, if you have slow processing speed, you're not picking up on all the pieces of information, right? And so that means that when they relay the information, they might miss big pieces and we think they're leaving that out. They're leaving out the big important part. That's a lie, right? Maybe not. Maybe we can assume the best and think that maybe they just weren't able to process everything, which we would actually expect. Maybe what's happening is confabulation, which we all actually do. Every time we have a memory and it plays out as that scene in our executive functioning, our brains are confabulating missing pieces of information, but it doesn't feel that way. That earliest memory that you have thought of many times throughout your life is almost certainly completely confabulated. But people get bristly when I tell them that because they trust it, they remember it, but that's just not something that you can do. And I've noticed that with my family as we tell stories, as the years go on, we all start adding these weird details, and I'm pretty sure we haven't added before because everybody's brains confabulate. But when you have an FASD, your brain is much more likely to confabulate, and we actually encourage confabulation a lot of the times by how we phrase questions or the speed at which we're doing things. And by not providing supports at the front end as they're taking in the information, but instead expecting them to remember it. And so then to treat this as a lie or as manipulative or all the words that we use, if the issue is confabulation, we're just plain wrong. But unfortunately, being wrong about these things and responding with punitive measures or punishments or disappointment or frustration, that adds to the stress that we are trying desperately to avoid in these kids' lives. Maybe they have cognitive distortions. And that is when you have a perception of the world this is going to happen for many different reasons, but you might think something like, everybody hates me. right? And so then as you encounter situations with that lens on, and then you're relaying it back to your parent, the child might say, yeah, she glared at me, or they were really mean to me. But that is based on this faulty idea of their cognitive distortions and that paradigm of the world. And so that will color their memories. And then maybe what's going on is just plain old memory. And what we know about people with FASDs, that on some days they can remember certain things, and then on other days they can't remember it. So their brain is not firing consistent pathways. And so like they'll sit there, they'll try to remember, but they just can't. And if we keep pushing, we're probably going to cause frustration. It's might be best if they were able to remember it at one point, but they can't today, wait a few more days, see if they can remember it again, or even better, don't rely on their memory. Provide supports on the front end, like visuals and a lot of other things that we can do. And I ask parents who acknowledge all of the executive functioning struggles and all the cognitive skill issues that their child has, but who then describe to me these vast conspiracies that their child has against them. I ask, well, what's actually more likely? What of all of these demands the most brain power? And the answer is intentional lying. Right? To be able to effectively lie, you have to have a certain amount of executive functioning skills. And so we can, before we go to that part of the chart, we can ask ourselves, what else could be going on? And so there are various different things we can do to help with memory. I can't really do it justice in this short training, unfortunately, in terms of how to set all of these up. But visuals are a big part of it. Using reminders that do not cause escalation. And that's where we often struggle, is if we are verbally reminding, that can create escalation or opposition for a lot of kids because they're irritated by that, right? And so we have to explore other ways that they are bought into and that they accept. Nothing that I'm suggesting tonight should lead to escalation. So if you think you're trying a strategy of mine and you see an escalation response, you should stop and take a step back and reevaluate what's going on. Okay. A lot of people asked me about either sexual behaviors or social skills. Those are also very complicated to address in a short training. But what I want us to remember is that social skills are not natural. They have to be developed. And so we often look at behaviors that seem antisocial as the person choosing to do it. Maybe we recognize the cluelessness of some of it. But we have to remember that in order for them to build those skills, they have to actually be able to process the situation. And they're not going to be able to process a social situation if their brain thinks that it's unsafe or if things are moving too quickly. Oh, these are great slides, but I'm going to skip them for the sake of time. These tell us how we learn when we are neurodiverse or have a disability versus neurotypical people. But one concept I really want to teach you all before you go into the direction of social skills and before you let any professional go into the direction of social skills is understanding, is what we're about to teach absolutely necessary for social connection, or are we just trying to get them to fit in and look neurotypical? And that's actually a significant issue for a lot of people with disabilities. Things like giving eye contact. We're not going to insist on eye contact. Often we impulsively do it because we think getting the eye contact gets the person's attention. And sometimes it does for some kids, but some disabilities prevent eye contact from being effective, and having unsafe neuroception will often make eye contact escalate the person. So we're not going to focus on that. That's a neurotypical expectation that we have eye contact. In my conversations with people, all of this intimate eye contact I'm giving to the camera does not happen. I'm very much averse to eye contact, believe it or not. Sharing toys with kids. If I'm sitting on the playground and I'm playing with my favorite toy and another kiddo walks up to me, this idea that we teach kids that they have to share, is it necessary or is it neurotypical? That's a neurotypical value. Would it be nice? Potentially, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about we are only going to take the time and the resources and our patience and our kids' patience to work on social skills that are absolutely necessary for connection. A lot of people with disabilities might do what we call stimming. So they might flap their hands or do funny things with their bodies. A lot of our kids might make a lot of really weird noises. which I understand can be annoying. And we might have to address that if it's overstimulating us or other people in the house. But if the only issue is really that it's embarrassing to us, that's not something we have to really care about. Society needs to understand what these behaviors are. We don't need to put that burden on our kids. And engaging in small talk, those kind of conversational things, very much a neurotypical social value, not necessary in order for us to connect with people. So in other words, our goal when addressing these social skill issues is not to get the kiddos to look or act neurotypical. Here's some humor for y'all. What are some practical supports for teaching social processing and social skills? Well, again, we're not going to start here. If you are dealing with a kiddo who is very reactive or who has struggling with stress and unsafe neuroception, for you to go out tonight and start this will probably be ineffective because that's not the place you start. But once we get there, once it's developmentally appropriate and they buy in, we want to practice and role play scenarios as much as possible. There's many different ways we can do this. But what this does, it allows pre-processing to happen. Just as a simple example, I had one family who was just telling me, it wasn't even a behavior that they were wanting a suggestion on, but they were just telling me when during recess, when our daughter is playing hide and go seek, she literally becomes so excited when the countdown begins that she can't process and find a hiding place. She's frozen in this excited, hyperactive state. And so I suggested to them, well, take her to the playground when school's not in session and help her find all the spots, right? And see if it does anything. I don't know if it's going to do anything. I'm just like, give it a try, right? To do the pre-processing. And what do you know? She suddenly was able to go immediately from point A to point B to process. That's just a simple example that allows somebody to participate in the game, like hide and seek. We can also do it for issues with relationships, right? Or how do we want to make friends? We can verbally practice that. And it's what we tend to do is we just tell them, don't go with your friends if they ask you to skip school. But what we really should do is go through it with them and have them say exactly what they should say, have it come out of their mouth. That completely rewires things and makes it much more likely that in that moment where there's potential slow processing and escalation of being excited to be invited, that they're going to say it, especially the more we can do it. Another example of practicing is this chart here. This has to do with some social cues that are necessary social cues, not BS neurotypical social cues. So again, if we're at the point where they're bought in, we can practice this. Somebody steps back during a conversation we're having. That could be a sign that they need more space. So then we can work with our kid on noticing it. And then adjusting. Maybe we lean back. Maybe we take a step back to acknowledge that social cue. At the very least, we don't want to step forward and make up that space, which is often what happens if you're not picking up on the cue. What's another example? People are not laughing at your jokes, right? This is a chart I actually made for a foster family for a specific kiddo. He tells a lot of jokes. He tells them frequently the same jokes, and a lot of the jokes aren't particularly funny. So what could be going on? We can slowly go over this with our kid. Maybe they're not finding the jokes very funny, and maybe they don't want to be rude, right? So they're kind of, right? Maybe they're getting irritated by the constant jokes. So then we can go and practice exactly what to do, physically or verbally in that scenario. Practice it as much as possible. The concept of practicing is also going to be very helpful when we can begin to work on cognitive emotional regulation and coping skills during escalation. Okay. I have a few more questions that I'm going to do impromptu, and then Marlee will join us with any other additional questions. Natural consequences. People want to know, family and friends push for learning the hard way, yet it doesn't seem to shift the behavior dynamics. Yeah, natural consequences are usually not actually natural consequences. We throw that word around so we feel okay in the systems about using what is essentially a punitive punishment. And even if it's not meant to be a punishment, if the perception or the result is feeling punished, that's the same thing. And the answer is we're not really focused on consequences or responses. We're focused on the proactive reasons for behavior and trying to prevent them in the first place. That's not a cop-out. That is the actual framework that we're talking about. Somebody mentioned my child doesn't have an interest in independent leisure activities without someone assisting him. He's been involved in many things like sports, scouts, and music, but never sticks with anything. Well, let's take a look. What do I immediately notice about sports, scouts, and music is that it naturally involves another person or a group of people there. Right? And we call this concept the external brain. And I mentioned before that in order to be able to self-entertain or to do an interest, you have to have certain level of executive functioning. So kids with FASDs and teenagers and adults with FASDs, they often will do a lot of things better if we would just be willing to do it with them. And this can have to do with, things like activities, but also things like chores. We're so desperate as parents to get them to go and do those chores independently. But what I'm going to tell you is for the foreseeable future, just do it with them. Right? Your physical presence helps them to think because they can't do it on their own. And your physical body moving and initiating things helps their body, in some cases anyway, to initiate. And so there are brain reasons why doing things with them, even if we think they should be old enough, we want to try to do as much as possible. Would love some tips and tricks for helping teens become self-aware. I'm not going to go into that now, but I do suggest a video on my website, which I'll pop up here in a second. I'm sorry, on my YouTube channel, that's called a stop and think plan. And so if you go to the channel, you can look for that video. It's something along the lines, making a stop and think plan. And that will answer that question into how can we practically help somebody think about what's going on. Marlee, do you want to pop on and see if there are any other questions that we can ask?
I do.
Oh, sorry, one more. What is the biggest single positive thing that a parent can do, everything that will elicit results? The answer is connection. Okay.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions, not a ton, because you've answered you covered a lot of ground, my friend.
I did.
Okay. So I think you kind of touched on this, but somebody's asking, do you think neurofeedback is helpful for individuals with FASD?
Depends on the person. I've had clients where we did see improvements, and I've had clients where it didn't seem to do anything. So that's a matter of individualization. If it's available to you and you have the resources to try it, there is a good reason to suspect it will not create a huge explosion or stress response, and it could be something that you try.
Okay.
We don't have data. We don't have data on FASD and neurofeedback yet. Hopefully someday somebody will do that study.
Yeah, you kind of said there's no real data on any of these therapies. There is
a little bit of data on whether or not ABA is helpful, and the answer is not particularly helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. It seems obvious to us that our daughter has slow processing, but it did not show up on the school's testing. Is there a test that would show it?
So I'm assuming you mean an intellectual test where we see working memory processing speed. We got to think about the context of that test. First of all, the terms working memory and processing speed that are used in those tests actually slightly differ from these neuroscientific definitions that we use. And so that's one thing to consider, is that they're not necessarily completely matching up. But even then, where are we taking the test? We're taking it in a calm, quiet environment, and we're usually having one-on-one support with a person who's administering the test, who's showing warmth and social connection, and that boosts performance. But the question is, does that reflect every other part of life? Right? Can they use whatever good processing speed they have as unfamiliar things or unsafe things are playing out? And the answer is often no. And so even if we can score high on an IQ test or in those subsections, it doesn't necessarily reflect. And so the people need to have the knowledge to look at for the practical signs of slow processing, even if they can perform well in the office.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What is the age of the kids who might go through FASD?
I'm having trouble interpreting that question. What?
Well, I'm thinking this may be a professional asking this, and I mean it's not a phase of life; it's continuous.
Right, prenatal exposure in the womb will lead to FASDs. A lot of people ask, can we expect progress to be made? And to me, while FASD is very important, the bigger question there is, are we supporting their issues of trauma and connection, and then starting to support the FASD. And so, yeah, we can expect improvements to be made if we provide supports, especially if you have a younger child. They have a lot of brain development left until they're between the ages of 23 and 25. And so if we use that development time wisely and not let things be a big stressful disaster constantly, and we're connecting, I am usually optimistic when I'm doing assessments. If I have parents that are bought in, I encourage them and I say, we can expect improvements. We just got to deal with the stressors now, and that takes a while.
What about neuroplasticity? We keep hearing that the brain can change. You know, you just said 23 to 25, it kind of stops developing, but we keep hearing neuroplasticity. People can learn and keep growing forever.
Yes, neuroplasticity is unrelated to overall brain development. The age, we have neuroplasticity well after that, which is amazing. And you know, I don't know, but I would hope that by supporting the children in the way that I am suggesting, and the way not just me, but many other professionals are suggesting, that we are building, or we are slowly building up to that, so that they would benefit, not from the games and the neuroplasticity apps, but from learning in a way from the adults in their life in a way that works for them. So using visuals and implementing that more, and integrating it more into life.
Thank you. I know there were some questions that were submitted by our fetal alcohol support group that we have at PHP, and they were around the questions of, you know, more adult children or teens, more teens and young adults, but around sexuality. Can you talk about, so here's one that just says, you know, we have a 20-year-old female who's living in a group home environment. As a resident, one's sexuality is a right in that environment. She wants a camera-enabled phone for online sexual relationships. COVID makes this normal, even among neurotypical people. She is wily in trying to get a camera phone, and predators have often offered to guide her. Should we allow her a camera-enabled phone?
Well, I am unwilling to directly answer that question unless I do a full assessment of a person. But the answer is it's completely individualized, and there's a risk. And a lot of the systems, you know, we talk about, well, they need to have equal rights as adults, which obviously I agree with, but that's a problem when we didn't spend the pre-adult years effectively teaching them these skills. And so now we want to throw them into this adult world, where we know as the parents, yes, this is their right, but if I give my child this phone, something screwed up is going to happen to them. And so I'm going to ultimately say, do what you need to do to protect the person, and help them understand, if possible, what the safety issues are, so they can build the skills to be able to do it safely. And that can be a lot of different things. Maybe we constantly monitor it, right, to start off with. Maybe we monitor it with our eyes directly. Maybe we have a program. There's various different things that we can do. And so then, of course, if this issue is your daughter is in a group home and you're not actually there, do you trust the staff and the group home to really take those risks seriously? And oftentimes, despite us telling them emphatically, we have to literally watch the internet as they're doing it. You know, people tend to think that they know the person and that they trust them, and all of these things can happen. So I'm not going to allow, I personally will not suggest that we give somebody a tool that everybody on the team knows is going to create physical or trauma danger. Well, we find a way to adapt or to get the person to buy into the fact that they need to learn some skills first. But again, if I knew more information about this person's personality and all the factors, I could probably give you something a little bit more practical because it's that individualized.
Okay.
And there is a great, let me put it in the chat box here. There's an organization called Among Friends, and she's a behavior consultant and therapist, I believe. Her name is Shauna Luther, and she specializes in developmental disabilities and sexualized behaviors. And I've heard great things about her trainings for adults. And so I think she does have some resources for people with developmental disabilities who are adults too. So if sexualized behavior or relationships is something that you're either thinking about for the future or you're dealing with now, you might want to check her out and see what she offers.
Yeah, there's a woman that's done some programs for us at Parents Helping Parents. Her name is Shauna Faribault, and she has...
Oh, yeah. I think I've been to one of her trainings. Yeah.
She's amazing.
Yeah, she's great.
And she only works with developmentally disabled folks, so she's pretty well known. And I highly recommend her stuff. Many of our kids are recommended for residential treatment programs. Do you know any that are knowledgeable about FASD?
Can't give you a single one. There are some programs in Wisconsin that are FASD specific. I don't know if they have openings, but in terms of general programs in other states, unfortunately, as far as my knowledge knows, I'm not aware of any of them. That doesn't mean that they're not out there, but they're pretty far and few between. And so unfortunately, once again, the onus is on you as the parents, as you make your decisions, to educate the people and hopefully get a feel of, are they willing to learn about FASD? Are they taking these needs seriously?
Great, thank you. Okay, one last question. My 10-year-old is not interested in any schoolwork. We're currently homeschooling the unschooling way. I know he has a really hard time and his work is modified, but he's still not interested. Any suggestions?
Well, that's something we would want to dig a little bit deeper on, because what my question would be, what does not interested look like? Is that refusal and escalation? Or is it, just sitting there zoning out? There could be a couple of different things going on there. But ultimately we have to adjust to where they're at. So he might right now, with all the stress and with the way the schooling is, maybe he can only do 10 minutes of schoolwork right now. I'm going to encourage you to take what you can get. Don't let it be a big issue that he can't do others. Don't let the school make it a big issue, because they're not going to be able to do anything on their end, most likely. And the idea is to, again, slowly build up the ability to do that. That being said, there's probably things that are practical that are preventing that from happening. So we can still problem solve in the meantime. And, it can be something like, what is the schedule? Does the schedule need to be different? What are the classes that we're starting with? Are all the children unmiked? And so there's too much sensory stuff. There's so many things that can lead to this idea that the kiddo is not interested, and that can be problem solved and explored.
Okay, great. Well, we're right on time at 8 o'clock. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of this information. There's so many families. We had a number of families who weren't able to make it tonight, so we have it recorded and we will be posting it in e-learning on the PHP website. I want to thank Nate and the Inclusion Collaborative for the amazing work they do. If you live in Santa Clara County and you have a child with any kind of disability, the Inclusion Collaborative is an awesome resource that you should, I can't recommend them enough. So, check them out. And thank you for everything. And I'm going to say goodbye. And thanks everybody for being with us tonight.
Have a good evening.
Okay, thank you.